2 minutes ago, the Israeli emergency broadcast system activated across the entire Tel Aviv metropolitan corridor, not an air raid siren, not a routine drill, a full civilian infrastructure alert, the kind they only use when something fundamental has broken, something that cannot be replaced by tomorrow morning, something that 4 million people depend on to simply be alive. 30 minutes before that, Iranian ballistic missiles, not drones, not artillery shells, not proxy rockets launched from Lebanese soil, Iranian state-launched ballistic missiles struck the Sorek desalination complex, the largest desalination facility in the Middle East, and one of the most critical pieces of civilian survival infrastructure on the planet. Not a military base, not a radar installation, not an Iron Dome battery, a water plant, the place where seawater becomes drinking water for 4 million Israeli civilians. And right now, as you watch this, those 4 million people have no primary water supply. The pipes are dry, the pressure is gone. The system that took decades and billions of dollars to build is, according to early satellite imagery and on-ground reports, structurally compromised at multiple critical nodes. The Israeli government has issued a single brief statement, 11 words. They are assessing the situation and coordinating with emergency services. 11 words. No timeline, no alternative supply plan announced, no international emergency declaration. That silence is not confidence. That silence is the sound of a government that does not yet have answers and knows it. This is not a military escalation. This is an attack on the biology of survival itself. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what the Sorek facility represents and why losing it is categorically different from every other strike we have covered on this channel. I will walk you through the precise weapon system Iran used and why the damage it causes cannot simply be repaired. It must be replaced. I will translate this infrastructure destruction into human biological reality. The math of thirst, the math of survival. I will show you why hospitals are already the most immediately endangered institutions in this crisis. And I will show you why the government's silence tonight is not strategy. It is incapacity. Before we go any further, if you are watching this channel for the first time, your support is genuinely what keeps independent geopolitical analysis alive. Please subscribe right now and hit the like button. Every share puts this in front of someone who needs to understand what is actually happening. The mainstream coverage will not go this deep. We will. Let's begin. To understand why this strike is different, you need to understand what the Sorek desalination complex actually is, not symbolically but mechanically. Israel is a semi-arid country. It receives less than 500 millimeters of rainfall per year across most of its populated coastline. Its natural freshwater reserves, the Sea of Galilee, the coastal aquifer, the mountain aquifer, have been under chronic stress for decades. By the early 2000s, Israel was facing a genuine water security collapse. The answer was desalination. The Sorek facility, located south of Tel Aviv near Rishon LeZion, uses a process called seawater reverse osmosis, SWRO. Seawater is drawn in from the Mediterranean at high volume, pre-filtered to remove biological material, then forced under extreme pressure, between 55 and 70 bar, through semi-permeable membranes that strip out dissolved salts, minerals, and contaminants. What emerges on the other side is potable water, mineralized to safe drinking standards, and then pumped into the national water carrier grid. The Sorek facility alone produces approximately 627,000 cubic meters of drinking water per day. That is not a supplementary source. That is the backbone. Together with the Hadera, Palmakim, and Ashdod desalination plants, Israel's desalination network supplies over 85% of the country's municipal drinking water. Sorek is not just a facility. It is a node, a singular, non-redundant pressure point in a network that was never designed to survive targeted destruction at this scale. This is why it was chosen. Military planners, Iranian or otherwise, study infrastructure dependency mapping. They identify the nodes where destruction does not just inconvenience, it cascades. Sorek is that node. Destroy the high-pressure pump systems, rupture the membrane filtration halls, damage the intake and brine discharge infrastructure, and you do not just cut water. You sever the biological lifeline of an entire coastal population. This was not random. This was deliberate, studied, and precise. Now let us talk about what hit it, and why this damage is not a repair problem. It is a replacement problem. Early assessments from open-source intelligence analysts tracking Iranian ballistic trajectories tonight indicate the use of Fatah-class or Khaybar-Shikan medium-range ballistic missiles, both systems capable of carrying warheads exceeding 500 kilograms and achieving terminal phase speeds of Mach 8 to Mach 13. At those velocities, the kinetic energy alone, before the warhead even detonates, is sufficient to structurally compromise reinforced industrial foundations. This is not the same as an artillery shell hitting a pipe. A precision ballistic strike on a desalination facility targets specific subsystems, the high-pressure pump arrays, the membrane filtration blocks, the electrical switching infrastructure that governs pressure regulation across the entire grid. These are not components you find in a warehouse. High-pressure reverse osmosis membranes are manufactured by a handful of specialized firms globally. Industrial seawater intake pump systems are engineered, ordered, and delivered on timelines measured in months, not days, not a crack in a pipe, not a broken valve, not a burned cable that an engineer can splice overnight. The pressure hull of a desalination facility hit by a Mach 10 warhead does not need a repair crew. It needs a rebuild, and a rebuild under wartime conditions, with supply chains already disrupted, with international shipping lanes destabilized, with engineers unwilling to enter an active conflict zone, does not happen in 72 hours. It does not happen in 72 days. 4 million people cannot wait 72 days. That is the gap between what the government will say and what the biology of this crisis actually demands. Let us stop talking about infrastructure for a moment. Let us talk about people. A human body, any human body, regardless of age, fitness, or wealth, requires a minimum of 3 liters of water per day to maintain basic physiological function. Not comfort, not health, survival. 3 liters. Below that threshold, kidney function begins to degrade within 24 hours. Cognitive performance collapses within 36. Organ failure begins its cascade at 48 to 72 hours in heat conditions, and Israel's coastal summer temperatures regularly exceed 32 degrees Celsius. 4 million people, 3 liters each. That is 12 million liters of drinking water needed every single day just to keep people alive. Now ask yourself, where does that come from tonight? Supermarket shelves across the Tel Aviv corridor were cleared of bottled water within 90 minutes of the alert. We have seen this before, in hurricanes, in earthquakes, in every infrastructure failure in modern history. Retail supply chains are not designed for emergency redistribution. A standard supermarket carries approximately 2,000 to 4,000 liters of bottled water at any given time. There are roughly 800 supermarkets serving the affected population zone. That is a maximum of 3.2 million liters, enough for less than 27% of one day's survival requirement. Emergency water tankers exist. The Israeli Homefront Command maintains strategic reserves. But logistics cannot scale vertically overnight. A standard military water tanker carries 10,000 liters. To deliver 12 million liters per day, you would need 1,200 tanker runs every single day through urban corridors already gridlocked with civilian panic, military convoys, and emergency vehicles. Not a shortage. Not an inconvenience, an absence. The math does not work. The trucks do not exist in those numbers. The roads cannot carry that volume. And every hour the government delays a formal emergency declaration is an hour that distribution networks remain uncoordinated and 4 million people remain without a plan. But the math of thirst is only the beginning, because in every city and every crisis there is a population that cannot wait for tanker trucks, cannot queue at a distribution point, cannot survive on reduced rations while officials coordinate. Hospitals. The greater Tel Aviv metropolitan area contains 14 major hospital complexes. Every single one of them is now operating under emergency water pressure protocols, which means reduced pressure, ration supply, and a rapidly closing window before clinical operations become dangerous. Consider what a hospital actually needs water for, and I mean this technically, not rhetorically. Surgical units require continuous sterile water flow for instrument sterilization and wound irrigation. A single operating theater performing routine procedures consumes between 300 and 500 liters per procedure. Dialysis units, serving Israel's approximately 6,000 chronic kidney disease patients, require 120 liters of ultra-pure water per dialysis session, 3 sessions per week per patient. Without it, those patients do not get sick. They die within days. Infection prevention in ICUs depends entirely on running water for hand-washing compliance. A single lapse in hand hygiene in a critical care environment can trigger a nosocomial infection cascade that kills immunocompromised patients within 48 hours. Maternity wards, burn units, pediatric oncology. Every single high-dependency unit in every hospital in this zone is now on a biological countdown clock. And here's the detail that should disturb you most. Hospital emergency water reserves, the tanks, the stored supplies, are designed for 24 to 48 hours of reduced operation. Not full operation, reduced. After 48 hours, hospitals do not slow down. They stop being hospitals. So let us return to those 11 words. We are assessing the situation and coordinating with emergency services. In the history of crisis communication, there is a well-established difference between operational silence and communicative incapacity. Operational silence is strategic. You do not reveal your response plan to an enemy who may still be watching. Communicative incapacity is something else entirely. It is what happens when a government does not have a response plan clear enough to communicate, even in the most general terms. Tonight, what we are watching is not operational security. It is incapacity dressed in the language of control. A government that had a functioning emergency response architecture in place for exactly this scenario, and Israeli planners have war-gamed infrastructure strikes for years, would have, within 30 minutes of confirmed impact, activated pre-positioned water distribution hubs, issued zone-by-zone civilian guidance, and opened a direct communication channel with hospital administrators across the affected corridor. None of that has happened publicly. What has happened is a press blackout, a military spokesperson reading from a prepared card, and social media filling the vacuum with panic, misinformation, and unverified footage. That vacuum is not neutral. Every hour of governmental silence is an active decision, and its consequences are measured not in political embarrassment but in dehydration rates, hospital deterioration, and civilian psychological collapse. This is not a critique of Israel alone. This is a pattern. Every government that has ever faced sudden civilian infrastructure failure has made the same calculation: control the narrative first, manage the reality second. But reality does not wait for press conferences. 4 million people are already living inside that gap. This strike does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a framework of international law. And tonight, that framework is being stress-tested in ways it has not faced since the Gulf War. The Geneva Conventions, specifically Additional Protocol 1, Article 54, explicitly prohibits the targeting of objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. Water installations are named directly. Desalination infrastructure falls unambiguously within that protection. Iran has just struck it anyway. The International Committee of the Red Cross has already issued a preliminary statement flagging the strike as a potential violation warranting immediate investigation. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is activating emergency response protocols. But here's the gap that no international body wants to say aloud. There is no enforcement mechanism that operates on a timeline relevant to 4 million people without water. Resolutions take weeks. Investigations take months. Legal proceedings take years. The biological clock ticks in hours. Among Israel's Western allies, the reaction tonight is something between alarm and strategic paralysis. The United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, all have condemned the strike in carefully worded statements. None have yet crossed the threshold of calling it a war crime formally and publicly, because to call it a war crime formally demands a response, and nobody in Washington, London, or Berlin is ready to define what that response looks like tonight. Tonight is not the beginning of this collapse. It is the final weight on a structure that has been cracking for months. Let us stack the record. In October, Iranian-aligned proxy networks executed coordinated drone strikes on Israel's northern power grid, 3 substations, 400,000 homes without electricity for 11 consecutive days. The government called it manageable. They said resilience. They said recovery. In January, Ben Gurion International Airport suspended operations for 19 consecutive hours following a ballistic missile threat cluster that overwhelmed Iron Dome's northern battery sequencing. The economy lost an estimated $340 million in a single suspended day of commerce. The government called it temporary. They said security protocols. They said business as usual. In March, the shekel hit a 14-year low against the dollar. Foreign direct investment into Israeli technology, historically the backbone of the modern economy, dropped 38% year on year. The government called it cyclical. They said market correction. They said confidence remains. And now tonight, the water supply, not a military setback, not an economic tremor, not a temporary disruption. This is civilizational collapse, arriving not in a single catastrophic explosion, but in the quiet accumulation of blows that each individually seemed survivable, until suddenly, irreversibly, they are not. Every system has a threshold, a point where the next failure does not simply add to the previous ones, it multiplies them. Israel crossed that threshold tonight. We have spent months watching this conflict through a military clock. Missile launch times, interception rates, escalation ladders, response windows measured in minutes. The cold, precise language of strategy, and detached from flesh, detached from thirst, detached from the body entirely. But tonight the clock changed. What is now running, silently, invisibly, inside 4 million human bodies across the Tel Aviv corridor is not a military clock. It is a biological clock, and a biological clock does not negotiate. It does not pause for diplomatic back channels or ceasefire frameworks. It does not wait for the United Nations to convene an emergency session. It does not respond to press releases, political statements, or carefully worded condemnations from foreign ministries meeting in comfortable rooms thousands of miles away. It runs on one variable only: time. At 24 hours, the first dehydration-related emergency wave begins overwhelming hospitals that are themselves already running dry. At 48 hours, the elderly, the dialysis patients, the post-surgical recoveries, the newborns, they do not send signals. They simply deteriorate, quietly. In apartments and wards across a city that once believed its infrastructure was untouchable. At 72 hours, this stops being a geopolitical story entirely. It becomes a humanitarian catastrophe, the kind documented in retrospect, in tribunal records, in history books containing photographs of people who never agreed to become symbols. No army, no government, no resolution passed at midnight in Geneva can negotiate with biology. The body has already begun its countdown. I want to leave you with two questions, and I genuinely want your answers in the comments below. At what point does targeting civilian water infrastructure cross the line from an act of war into an act of extermination? And if the international legal framework cannot enforce its own protections within the biological timeline of human survival, does that framework still mean anything at all? Write your answer below. This community's analysis consistently runs deeper than most professional newsrooms, and I mean that without reservation. If this video gave you something the mainstream coverage did not, please subscribe, hit the like button, and share this with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening right now. Click the video on screen. The next one goes even deeper.